Let me begin with a simple observation about human societies. Every civilization tells a story about itself, not just history, something deeper. A story that answers the biggest questions people live with every day. What does it mean to be a human? What makes a life valuable? What counts as justice? Who has authority? And what is the purpose of life itself? Those questions are not optional. Every culture eventually answers them in one way or another. You might call it a worldview, a moral framework, a founding narrative. But every society has one. Ancient civilizations understood this very clearly. Take the Roman world. Rome had its own sacred story about order, duty, and glory. Their gods reflected the ideals of the empire. Jupiter symbolized authority. Mars represented strength in battle. Citizenship carried dignity and privilege. Justice often meant maintaining order and expanding the empire. That narrative helped hold Roman society together for centuries. But like every civilization, Rome eventually discovered that stories alone cannot sustain a culture forever. Centuries later, Europe experienced a very different intellectual shift during what we call the Enlightenment. Thinkers began grounding human dignity not in divine creation, but in human reason. Political authority, they argued, came from the consent of the governed. Rights were described as universal and inherent to the individual. Those ideas profoundly shaped the modern world. Concepts like liberty, equality before the law, and constitutional government grew out of this period. But even these ideas did not emerge from nowhere. They developed in societies that had already been shaped for centuries by Christian thought about human dignity and moral responsibility. Which brings us to a deeper point. Civilizations do not simply create moral values out of thin air. They inherit them. They interpret them. They build institutions around them. Over time, those moral assumptions shape everything: law, education, family life, art, even how people understand suffering and success. At the center of Western civilization for many centuries was the Christian story. In that story, human dignity comes from the belief that every person is created in the image of God. Justice includes protecting the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Meaning is not found simply in wealth or achievement, but in a life lived in relationship with God and service to others. Authority is not absolute power. It is responsibility under a higher moral law. These ideas helped shape many of the institutions and moral instincts that still influence Western societies today. Of course, modern societies are religiously diverse, and people draw their moral convictions from many different sources. But the larger question remains: what story ultimately holds a culture together? What moral vision gives a society a shared understanding of dignity, justice, meaning, and authority? Because history shows that when a culture loses its moral narrative, confusion often follows. People begin searching for meaning in politics, identity, wealth, or endless self-expression. The result can be a society that is materially advanced, but spiritually restless. So perhaps the real conversation is not simply about politics or policy. It is about culture. What moral story are we telling about human life? And which vision of human dignity, justice, meaning, and authority will shape the future of the societies our children will inherit? For Christians, the answer comes from a story that begins not with the state, or the market, or the individual, but with a creator who gives human life its worth and purpose. Whether one shares that belief or not, it has played a profound role in shaping the moral foundations of Western civilization. And understanding that history may help us have a more thoughtful conversation about the future of our culture.